Prime Minister, right, he's facing some tough questions about his recent trip to Washington and about his stance on Ukraine. And, you can just tell that beneath all the diplomacy and the smiles, there are some serious tensions there.
Okay, so can you paint a picture for us? What's the scene and who are the key players and what are they saying?
So imagine, right, you're in the halls of UK Parliament, packed with MPs. Everyone is waiting with bated breath. And the opposition is grilling the Prime Minister about this trip, and their questions are pointed, almost accusatory. They're pressing him on a possibility of the UK getting pulled into a war, talking about the economic consequences of trade wars and tariffs. It's like they're trying to, find a crack in his armor, in his carefully constructed facade.
So how does the Prime Minister respond? I mean, he's in a real pressure cooker here. Does he crack under pressure or does he manage to hold his own?
Oh, he definitely tries to project this air of calm and control, but you can, feel the tension just below the surface. He talks a lot about the importance of a united front. The US, Europe, and Ukraine all working together to stop Russian aggression, but then the opposition, they throw a real curveball.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting, right? Tell me more.
Oh, absolutely. So the opposition leader brings up what seems like a minor detail. He points out that, despite the Prime Minister's calls for the strong U.S. security guarantee for Ukraine, the U.S. actually pulled back military aid. And this little detail, it throws a wrench into the whole united front narrative.
Yeah, it kind of makes you question the whole narrative, right? So how does the Prime Minister handle this? It seems like a potentially damaging revelation.
Well, he tries to kind of deflect the blow, right?
Mm.
He highlights this big win from his Washington trip, this direct commitment he got from the U.S. president on NATO's Article 5.
Okay, Article 5. For those of us who, didn't major in international relations, break down why this is such a big deal.
So Article 5, right, is basically the foundation of NATO. It's
Sure.
the collective defense clause. What it means is an attack on one NATO member is like an attack on all of them. So in this case, it's a really strong signal to Russia that any aggression towards Ukraine would trigger a unified response, possibly even involving the full force of NATO.
So this sounds like a win for the Prime Minister, right? He managed to spin a potentially negative situation into something positive.
Well, on the surface, yeah. But this commitment to Article 5, it raises some interesting questions. It kind of signals a potential shift in U.S. policy, and it maybe even increases the risk of, a direct confrontation with Russia.
So instead of de-escalating the situation, this commitment might actually raise the stakes.
Exactly. It's like, a calculated gamble, and it's hard to know how Russia will respond.
This is like some kind of high-stakes chess game. Every move has huge consequences. But wait, there's more, right? The opposition brings up something else, right? Something about intelligence sharing.
You got it. Out of nowhere, this question comes up about reports that, get this, the U.S. might have told Britain to stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine. And this could, jeopardize the whole Five Eyes network. Now things are getting serious.
Hold on, Five Eyes? What is that? Like some kind of top secret spy organization? Explain it to me like I'm a new recruit or something?
Okay, so picture Five Eyes, like this super exclusive intelligence club. It's the U.S., the U.K., Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And they share all kinds of sensitive stuff, intercepted communications, insights into global threats, the whole 9 yards. So if trust breaks down within this alliance, well, the fallout could be enormous.
Wow, so this question about the U.S. potentially instructing Britain to hold back information from Ukraine, that's not just like a minor blip, is it?
Not at all. It suggests that there might be a crack in the foundation of this really important intelligence sharing partnership.
So how does the Prime Minister handle this? I mean, he can't just reveal state secrets right there in Parliament.
He has to be careful, right? He chooses his words very carefully,
Yeah.
emphasizing how important transatlantic unity is and trying to avoid creating conflict between the U.S. and Europe.
Hmm.
But the fact that he's being so evasive, it kind of speaks volumes.
It's like he's trying to downplay things while also trying to avoid picking a fight with the U.S.
Exactly. It's like he's walking a tightrope, right?
Yeah.
Trying to keep everyone happy, but it just raises more questions.
Hmm.
Why is he being so cagey about this? What's he not telling us?
That's a great point. It's like we've stumbled onto a clue in a mystery, and now we're dying to figure it out. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's shift gears for a second and talk about the elephant in the room.
Ah, you mean the economic anxiety surrounding this whole thing?
Exactly. People are worried about trade wars, tariffs, the potential for this whole geopolitical situation to hurt their wallets. How does the Prime Minister address these very real concerns?
Well, he does it in a pretty clever way, actually. He links national security to economic security, making the argument that investing in the UK's defense industry isn't just about military strength, but it's also about creating jobs and boosting the economy at home.
So he's basically saying, look, defense spending isn't just a necessity, it's an opportunity. That's smart. It's a way to connect with voters who are worried about what all this means for their everyday lives.
Exactly. He wants to project this image of a strong UK, strong militarily, strong economically, they can weather any storm. But just when you think he's dodged all the tough questions, the opposition, they come back with another one.
Oh, man. This whole session is like a boxing match. Back and forth, each side trying to land a knockout blow. What was the final jab?
The last question was about increasing defense spending. The opposition wants to know, what impact this will have on jobs and growth, particularly for ordinary people.
Yeah, not just the big picture stuff, but how it affects people on the ground. Did the prime minister offer any concrete solutions, or did he just like retreat into vague promises?
No, he actually used this as a chance to highlight specific things the government's doing to boost the economy. Things like a new hub that was announced earlier that week and spending targets to help small and medium-sized businesses get a piece of the defense industry pie.
So he's connecting defense spending to tangible benefits that voters can see and feel. That's pretty strategic.
It is, and it's a good place to stop for today.
Yeah, that's a lot to digest. We'll pick up this conversation next time and see where this geopolitical chess match leads us. Thanks for listening. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? He kind of managed to spin a question about spending more money into this positive message about economic growth, but I don't know, I feel like we've only scratched the surface here. Those questions earlier, about the intelligence sharing and what the U.S. is really doing in Ukraine, they really make you think.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like we're seeing this carefully constructed, public face of diplomacy.
Hmm.
But you can almost hear the whispers of dissent, like conflicting agendas bubbling under the surface. Those questions from the opposition, they might seem like you're focused on specific details, but I think they point to something much bigger, like maybe a breakdown of trust between the U.S. and its allies.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like that old saying, right? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But in this case, it seems like the lines between friend and foe are kind of blurry.
Right. And this whole intelligence sharing thing, that really brings this tension to the forefront. The Five Eyes Alliance, it's built on this foundation of shared intelligence, this deep trust and cooperation. If the U.S. is really telling Britain to keep information from Ukraine, well, that would signal a major shift in how this alliance works.
So what could be behind this potential shift? Why would the U.S. want to limit what intelligence they share with Ukraine? Especially now, with all this tension with Russia, it seems kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? There are a few possible explanations, and none of them are simple. One theory is that the U.S. might be trying to control the flow of information, kind of keep a lid on things to avoid escalating the conflict with Russia. Intelligence is a powerful tool, and sharing it too freely could be seen as provocative.
That makes sense, but it also seems a little contradictory, don't you think? I mean, on the one hand, the U.S. is out there publicly saying they're committed to NATO and Article 5, basically saying they'll defend their allies. But then on the other hand, they might be undermining that very commitment by restricting intelligence sharing, which could weaken those allies' ability to defend themselves.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex situation full of contradictions and, potential pitfalls. Another possibility is that this apparent change in U.S. policy is actually a reflection of disagreements within the U.S. government itself. Maybe some people in the government want to take a tougher stance against Russia, while others are more cautious, worried about things getting out of control.
So it's like an internal power struggle that's spilling out onto the international stage with Ukraine caught in the middle.
Exactly. And the U.S., they have a long history of internal debates and policy shifts when it comes to foreign policy. Different agencies and departments often have different ideas about how to handle things, which can lead to mixed messages and actions that don't always seem to line up.
Okay, so we've got potential tension between the U.S. and its allies, and possibly even within the U.S. government itself. It's like a multi-layered chess game, and we're only seeing a few of the pieces. But what does all this mean for Ukraine? They're the ones stuck in the middle of this geopolitical tug of war.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? For Ukraine, this uncertainty is dangerous. They rely on support from the West, both militarily and economically. If their allies start to waver, if there's any sign of division, well, that could embolden Russia and make a peaceful resolution even harder to achieve.
It's like a high-stakes poker game, and the players are making moves without really knowing what the consequences will be. We talked about the potential for things to fall apart within the Five Eyes alliance, but what would that actually look like in the real world? How would it affect people's lives?
That's a great point, and it's easy to get lost in all these big geopolitical ideas and forget about the human impact. But the truth is, if this intelligence sharing network breaks down, it could have very real consequences for everyone. The Five Eyes Alliance, it plays a vital role in fighting terrorism, cybercrime, all these global threats. If it weakens, our ability to deal with these threats weakens too.
So this isn't just about some far-off conflict in Eastern Europe. It could actually affect our safety and security right here at home.
Absolutely. A weaker Five Eyes alliance could mean more terrorist attacks, more cyber attacks, more opportunities for criminals and hostile actors to, take advantage. It could affect everything from our financial systems to our personal data. It's a pretty sobering thought.
It really makes you realize that these seemingly small details, like that one question about intelligence sharing in UK Parliament, they can actually be clues to much bigger things happening in the world, shifts that could have huge consequences.
It's true. It's like those little details in a spy movie that seem insignificant at first, but then turn out to be crucial to the whole plot.
Okay, so what should we, as informed citizens, be taking away from all of this? How should we be thinking about Ukraine and this potential rift between the U.S. and its allies?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that we need to be careful about taking things at face value. Just because leaders are talking about unity and cooperation, it doesn't mean that's what's really happening. We need to look beyond the carefully crafted statements and pay attention to the little things, the inconsistencies, the things that aren't being said.
So we need to be critical thinkers, right? Not just passive consumers of information. We need to read between the lines and look for those hidden meanings.
Exactly. And we need to remember that the situation in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. It's about the balance of power in Europe, the relationship between the U.S. and its allies, and the possibility of a much bigger conflict. We need to understand that big picture, that geopolitical chessboard, to really make sense of the individual moves.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but we only have a few of the pieces, but the stakes are high, really high. And if we get it wrong, the consequences could be disastrous. What else should we keep in mind as we try to figure out this complicated situation?
I think it's important to remember that real people's lives are at stake. These decisions being made in Washington, London, Moscow, they directly impact millions of Ukrainians. It's easy to get lost in all the talk about geopolitics and forget about the human cost of conflict.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that behind all the headlines and the political maneuvering, there are real people facing real challenges. Their lives are being disrupted, the future is uncertain, and they're caught in the middle of forces beyond their control.
And that's something we should never forget. As we try to understand these complex events happening around the world, we need to keep that human element in mind. We need to remember that behind the statistics and the strategies, there are real people just trying to survive, to protect their families, to hold on to hope.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget that real people are affected by all of this.
Absolutely. And in a situation like this, so volatile, the human cost could be huge.
Yeah.
But maybe we can shift gears a bit. Talk about potential outcomes. We've talked about some of the tensions, the risks, but how could the situation actually play out? What are some of the scenarios we might see?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? It feels like we're standing at this crossroads with all these different paths leading into the unknown. What are some of the paths we might go down?
Well, one possibility, and maybe the most worrying one, is that these tensions we've been talking about, they get worse. That rift between the U.S. and its allies, it gets wider, and Russia, they take advantage, and they increase the pressure on Ukraine.
Okay, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. What would that look like, on the ground?
Imagine, right? Russia sees weakness. They see that the West isn't united, and they start to ramp up their military presence near Ukraine. Maybe we see more cyber attacks, targeting their infrastructure, disinformation campaigns to cause chaos and mistrust, maybe even covert operations to destabilize the country.
It's kind of scary to think about, especially knowing that real people would suffer. But how would the West respond to something like that? Especially if they're already divided.
That's the tough part. If the West isn't united, it's hard to present a strong front. We might see some countries imposing sanctions, but others might hesitate, worried about the economic impact or making things worse. And that hesitation, that could make Russia bolder, lead to even more aggression. And then there's always the risk of miscalculation. One side misinterprets the other's actions, and things escalate out of control.
Okay, yeah, that scenario is pretty grim. It sounds like the world could be on the brink of a much larger conflict with potentially disastrous consequences. Are there any other possibilities? Anything more optimistic? Like, is there a path where diplomacy wins out?
Of course, there's always hope, right? Another scenario is that the U.S. and its allies, they manage to put aside their differences and present a united front to Russia. Maybe there are new diplomatic efforts, more military and economic support for Ukraine, and a clear message to Moscow that any more aggression will have consequences, serious consequences.
So strength and unity, right. The idea being that a united front would deter further aggression and maybe even open the door to a negotiated solution. But it seems like even in that best case scenario, Ukraine is still in a very difficult position.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. No matter what happens, Ukraine is likely to suffer. Their economy is in a tough spot, their society is divided, and this constant threat of conflict takes its toll. Even if things go well, they're facing a long and difficult road to recovery.
It really highlights how these big decisions made by world leaders, they have a direct impact on the lives of everyday people. But let's bring this back to our listeners. We've covered a lot of ground, a lot of complex information. What are the key takeaways they should be thinking about as they try to make sense of all this?
I think the most important takeaway is that we all need to be active, engaged citizens, not just passively consuming information. We need to be skeptical of what we read and hear, especially with all the information overload and misinformation out there. We need to look at different perspectives, consider different sources, and really sharpen our critical thinking skills.
So don't just accept everything you see on social media or hear on the news at face value. Do your own research, dig a little deeper, and don't be afraid to question what you think you know.
Exactly. And remember, things are constantly changing. What seems true today might be different tomorrow. The best way to stay informed is to stay engaged, to keep learning, to keep asking questions, the tough questions.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this complex world of international relations. We've explored the relationships between the US, the UK, and Ukraine, looking at those hidden tensions, the strategies, the potential for both conflict and cooperation.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope our listeners now have a better understanding of what's shaping our world and why it's so important to stay informed and engaged.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep thinking critically.